The bow does not care about you. It never did. It will take your shoulder, your spine, your years, and your body, and it will give you back nothing but the temporary usefulness of a weapon the crown needed and you happened to be holding. You are not a knight. You will never be a knight. The horse costs more than your father earned in a decade. The armor costs more than the horse, and neither will ever belong to a man who draws a plow between seasons and spends his Sundays at the village butts because the law says he must. What you have instead is a bowstave taller than your chest, a string that requires your entire back to move, and a legal obligation that follows you until the body gives out entirely. The archer's life begins not on a battlefield with banners and trumpets, but on a muddy Sunday morning in a field behind the church. You're surrounded by men who smell of animal labor and damp wool, watching an older man demonstrate something that looks simple until your own arms attempt it. The draw stops you immediately. The bow resists with a weight that shocks the arms and travels straight into the shoulders and upper back. You're not ready for it because nothing in your daily life has asked this of your body before. The string sits at full draw for less than a second before your hands release, and the arrow skips offline and strikes the earthen mound at a useless angle. The men watching do not mock you. They have all been where you are. They simply wait while you reach for another arrow, because practice does not end because you failed the first shot. It continues until your arms stop trembling enough to be useful, and then it continues further still. In that continuation is the beginning of the trap. The village butts are not impressive structures. Two earthen mounds set at a measured distance across flat ground at the edge of the common field. The target faces are weathered circles of painted wood, the center stained dark from the accumulated impacts of previous seasons. The field carries the marks of long use, trodden ground where archers stand, worn paths between the mounds, a faint smell of cut wood and old feathers that lingers even when no one is practicing. This is where archery begins, not in a fortress armory. Here, on ground, the village also uses for grazing, temporarily converted each Sunday into a place of civic obligation. The men who gather here come directly from church. Rough wool, linen shirts, leather shoes worn soft with field labor. Some carry their own bows wrapped in oiled cloth. Others share equipment passed between households. The law that brings them here is not something most of them have read. Most cannot read at all. The expectation arrives through other channels, the sheriff's officer who makes periodic appearances to observe and report, the village headman who mentions the requirement after the service ends, the social pressure of neighbors who notice when an able-bodied man fails to appear. Absence is visible in a village of 40 households. It is noticed and remembered. The community does not formally punish casual absence, but reputation functions as its own enforcement in a place where everyone depends on everyone else, across every harvest and every dispute requiring witnesses. You appear because not appearing costs more than appearing. And the cost of appearing, repeated across weeks and months and seasons, reshapes the cost calculation permanently. Your father drew a bow. His shoulders told you this without words. The left one sat slightly higher than the right when he stood still, and the muscle across his upper back on the drawing side had a density to it, a thickened cord running from shoulder to spine, that you noticed as a child when he worked shirtless during summer threshing. He never explained it. It was simply part of how he was built. You understood what it meant only when your own body began changing. It starts in the first weeks of serious practice, when the shoulder soreness stops being the sharp complaint of unused muscle and becomes a deeper awareness of something being worked and reformed. The tendon at the back of the left shoulder thickens gradually. The muscles stabilizing the shoulder blade change their relationship to the bones beneath. Slowly, across months, the body builds the structure the bow demands. This is not pleasant. It is functional. There is a difference, and the difference matters because the functionality is useful, while getting there consists mostly of waking up stiff, working through the stiffness, drawing 100 arrows, working through new stiffness, and sleeping in a way that does not fully restore what the day removed. Minor injuries layer onto each other before fully resolving. A finger blister hardens to callus. A strained muscle in the upper back develops into a chronic tightness that sits below the shoulder blade through all weather. Worse when cold, never fully absent. You're 11 or 12 when practice becomes serious. The bow you start with is lighter than the war bow older men use, a shorter stave with a draw weight manageable enough to complete a session without losing control of the arrow. The lighter bow does not teach you to pretend the weapon is easy. It teaches the motion, the stance, the anchor at the jaw, the follow-through of the drawing elbow. The weight increases as you grow into it. By the time you are 15, the bow in your hands is approaching what the older men carry. Your body has been building toward this since it began. You did not choose the direction of the construction. The bow chose it for you. The equipment has a voice, and it speaks constantly about money. A serviceable longbow costs what a laborer earns in several days of field work. Good yew must be sourced, cured, and worked by a bowyer whose skill is not cheap. The finished stave will last years of careful use. Left too long in damp conditions or drawn beyond its design, it warps. A warped bow does not shoot straight. It may split under load. A split bow mid-draw strikes the hand or face with enough force to open the skin. You maintain the bow with attention and habit. You wax the string. You store the stave unstrung between sessions. You check the tips for cracks after hard use. None of this knowledge is difficult. All of it requires time. Arrows disappear at a rate that adds up. A full sheaf contains 24 shafts, each fitted with split goose feathers and an iron bodkin tip. During practice, arrows are recovered and reused, but shafts crack, fletching tears loose, and tips loosen from their sockets. Replacing them is a recurring expense measured in small amounts that accumulate across seasons. For a household where a vegetable garden, a share of the common field, a few chickens, and possibly a pig represent the total margin between sufficiency and shortfall, these recurring small costs matter. The bow sits in the corner of the single-room house like a quiet creditor, always requiring something. The Sunday after harvest ends and autumn begins closing in, the practice field carries different light. Shadows stretch long across the butts even at midday. Men's breath shows in the air. The ground underfoot is hardening toward first frost, and the sound of arrows striking the earthen butt face is crisper and more distinct than in summer. You have been doing this 3 years with consistent attendance, and the difference between your first sessions and these is measurable. The draw no longer stops you. Your left arm extends and your right hand comes back in one continuous motion the body has memorized deeply enough to execute without managing each component. The arrow flies with something approaching reliability. The older men notice. Not loudly. A nod after a clean sequence. A brief comment about the draw being smoother. Small acknowledgments that carry weight in the context of men who do not praise casually. They are saying, you have become functional. Not exceptional, functional. That functionality is visible to more people than you realize. The village constable, who attends practice some Sundays, is not only watching for irregularity. He is compiling information with practical use in the county's military assessment. Not who can draw a war bow, who maintains attendance. Who has reached the age and skill worth entering into the informal knowledge that flows between village administration and the Crown's recruitment apparatus. Your developing skill passes upward through mechanisms you do not directly observe, settling into the broader understanding of where trained archers can be found when the Crown requires them. You are becoming legible to a system that does not announce itself until it needs something from you. The first time you hear the name of a French campaign, it arrives not as distant politics, but as a change in the air of the village. Men who have served before grow quieter in the alehouse. Conversations near the church porch shift when you approach. Wives speak in shorter sentences to their husbands. The mood at the practice field tightens, and though practice itself continues identically. Then the official word arrives. A county officer traveling between settlements carries documents that local administrators receive and interpret. What becomes known quickly is the outline. A muster is being organized. Skilled archers are required. Compensation has been set, and departure will follow within weeks. The transition from this news to standing in a muster line takes 3 weeks. 3 weeks is long enough to finish the small tasks you meant to complete before winter. Organize household provisions you will not be here to help accumulate. It is not long enough to fully comprehend the scale of what is coming, which is perhaps fortunate. You appear at the muster point with your bow, arrows, a knife, a spare bowstring wrapped in waxed cloth, and whatever personal provisions you could carry. The gathering is larger than anything you have seen in daily life. Hundreds of archers drawn from across the county, standing in loose groups on open ground near a manor that serves as the administrative center. The contracting official works through the crowd methodically. He records your name, assesses your equipment, asks brief questions about your experience, and assigns you to a company. Several minutes. It does not feel significant. It is one of the most significant moments of your life. It converts you from a village man with a bow into a contracted soldier who belongs temporarily to the Crown's military structure. The legal threshold you crossed in that brief conversation will take months to uncross. Walking begins immediately after muster and barely stops. Feet speak first. Leather shoes built for village paths were not designed for sustained daily marching on packed road surfaces. Blisters form at the heel and along the outside of the foot, break, reform. The skin thickens where it can and stays raw where it cannot. The bow must be carried. A long bow at full height is slightly taller than most men, and carrying it upright across a day's march requires constant grip adjustment to prevent fatigue accumulating in one shoulder before shifting to the other. The arrows must be kept dry. Rain, which arrives unpredictably, requires immediate response. The bowstring comes off and goes under clothing against body warmth. The stave wraps in available cloth. The tips are covered. All of this is managed while still walking. The column does not pause for weather preparation. France arrives not as a dramatic crossing, but as a continuation of the same march on slightly different ground. The people you pass regard the column with expressions ranging from careful blankness to barely concealed anxiety. You do not have strong feelings about them. You have sufficient demands on your attention. The camp, when it forms each evening, is a functional misery. Tents exist for commanders. Archers sleep in whatever shelter lean-to arrangements and scavenged materials can produce. Small fires where fuel can be found, ringed with damp boots and wet wool that steams and smells strongly but eventually achieves a form of dryness. You eat what is distributed. Bread when available, salt meat regularly, pottage when the cooking wagon can produce it. The calories are sufficient most days and insufficient on others. Your bowstring has been rechecked 4 times today. The stake cutting begins 2 days before the first major engagement, and it is when the abstract awareness that a battle is coming becomes a series of physical tasks that crowd out other thinking. Stakes are sharpened wooden poles, cut from available timber and pointed at both ends, driven into the ground at a forward angle in front of the archer's position to break cavalry momentum. Each archer cuts and carries several. The cutting is agricultural labor applied to military preparation. Select a straight section of branch. Strip the bark. Cut both ends to points. Test the sharpness. Repeat. The weight is awkward to carry alongside a bow and a sheaf of arrows. The ground chosen for engagement matters in ways that take time to see clearly. Higher ground when available. Ground that limits the frontage an enemy force can use. Open ground in front of archer positions for effective range. The commanders make these selections. Your role is confined to walking to where you are directed and beginning the stake preparation when you arrive. Driving each stake requires a mallet and a body behind it, the point going in at a forward angle, deep enough to hold against a horse's impact. The line of stakes forms a fence of points along the front of the formation. Behind this line, you stand. Your arrows are planted point down in the earth at your feet for fast retrieval. The quiver carries the remainder. It looks, from the outside, like preparation. From the inside, it feels like something being constructed that you will not be able to leave once it is complete. Dawn arrives with fog, and dense enough to reduce visibility to 50 yards, carrying cold that penetrates clothing immediately. The fog makes sound strange. Distant movement sounds closer than it is. You stand behind the stakes, bow unstrung because damp air will sag the string and reduce cast if it sits strung too long before the moment of use. Around you, other archers occupy their positions. The weight is its own form of labor. When the fog thins, thinning first at ground level and dissolving upward to reveal a gray sky, the scale of what is arrayed opposite you becomes visible by degrees. Movement in the distance, then the shapes of formations, then the individual resolution of horses and armored men preparing to advance. You string the bow. The string seats cleanly. You draw it once briefly to feel the tension and the familiar weight distributing across back and shoulder and arms. 24 shots in the quiver, another sheaf planted at your feet. Supply wagons with additional arrows somewhere behind the line. The rate of fire possible from a trained English archer draws on every hour of every Sunday practice session for years. 6 aimed shots per minute under controlled conditions. Under battlefield conditions, with accumulated campaign fatigue in the shooting muscles, the number drops. But in massed formations, hundreds of archers releasing near simultaneously produce an arrow density over the enemy position that the receiving end experiences as something between hail and catastrophe. The signal comes through the command chain, verbal and simple. You draw. The sound of a massed volley is not what imagination suggests. It is a percussive rush and a dense atmospheric compression that arrives before the arrows reach their target, followed by the sharp collective impact of iron and wood striking horse and armor and earth, and then the noise of the receiving end. Horses screaming, commands breaking into fragments, the chaos of a formation discovering it is under fire from a density it underestimated. Draw and release. Draw and release. The motion is identical in mechanics to every Sunday at the village butts, except the targets are at combat range and moving, and the urgency compresses the pause between shots to its minimum. 20 shots in roughly 4 minutes. At the 15th, the left shoulder burns in a specific way it does not burn during practice, the way it does late in a long session when each repetition costs more than the one before. You do not slow down. To your left, 20 yards down the line, a man has stopped shooting. You do not look. You draw and release. The cavalry contingent shifts angle, probing for the edge of the archer formation rather than driving directly into the stakes. This is the moment when the tactical picture that seemed clear from behind the stakes becomes significantly less clear. Cavalry reaching the stakes does not stop cleanly. What happens instead is a reduction of speed, a series of forced turns and near impacts creating chaos in front of the line. Some horses take stakes in the chest, some riders are unsaddled by their mount's panicked turn. Some horses find the gaps between stakes that are spaced too widely. The archer's bow is effectively useless at close range against armored cavalry that has reached his position. This understanding arrives not as a new thought, but as a confirmation of something already known abstractly, now made immediately concrete by the sound of heavy horses inside the stake line. You run backward. The bow comes with you because abandoning equipment has costs. But you are not drawing it. The ground is churned mud and the running is not clean. A man to your right goes down in a shallow hollow and rises immediately, but the delay puts him directly in the path of a horse that has followed through the gap. What happens next is quick and specific and leaves him on the ground in a way that makes clear he will not be following the retreat without assistance. You reach the infantry formation. You stand at the rear, breathing hard, the bow in your left hand. Watching men with swords and pole weapons do the work your weapon cannot do at this range. When it ends, the field holds the specific silence of aftermath. Horses and men immobile in mud. The sounds of injury audible from multiple directions. You have survived. The word does not feel triumphant. It feels like a fact, one of several, along with a burning shoulder, the 12 arrows remaining, and the question of what comes next. What comes next is collecting usable arrows from the field. Archers who are uninjured move through the aftermath, pulling shafts from earth and from the bodies of horses, cleaning and returning intact ones to supply. Many are broken beyond reuse. The work is unpleasant and systematic and takes hours. The man who went down at the stake line has a broken leg from the horse's impact. The bone is set and bound. But he will not walk unassisted for months. He will not draw a war bow again for substantially longer, if at all. Whether the leg heals straight depends on factors outside anyone's control. Infection, the nature of the break, the body's healing capacity under campaign conditions. You apply to your own shoulder the standard self-treatment of a soldier who cannot access medical care without a more serious reason. Move it through its range of motion, confirm the drawing motion produces a sharp protest at full extension, but that nothing appears structurally compromised, except that you will be drawing a bow again tomorrow, whether the shoulder is ready or not. The march home begins in November, when the campaign season closes under a combination of weather, depleted supply, and strategic conclusion. The return march carries the additional weight of accumulated injury. Men who managed wounds for weeks navigate the same roads with less reserve than they had coming out. The shoulder on the march home is a constant presence in a way it was not when you left England. You're aware of it during the march in the way you are aware of a stone in a shoe. Not disabling, not ignorable, a persistent reference point for the condition of the overall system. The port is reached after 11 days of marching. The crossing is rougher than the outbound passage, a late autumn channel with swells that do not permit the tolerable misery of the crossing to France, but the active participatory misery of genuine seasickness for 6 hours in a crowded hold. England arrives as a grey coast under grey sky, where the relief of seeing it is unsentimentally physical, the knowledge that the march from here is toward home. The discharge at the muster point proceeds normally. Pay is settled. The walk home takes 2 days. You know the roads. The landscape becomes familiar in the way familiar landscape becomes almost audibly recognizable after months in foreign country. The specific shape of the hills, the light falling across the common fields in late afternoon, the village church bell across the distance when the wind is right. Your wife is at the door when you come up the lane. The reunion contains little ceremony because neither of you has ceremony easily available and because the relief of the return is large enough that it does not require amplification. You go inside. The house is as you left it, managed without your preferences for months. This is fine. The household survived. You survived. The shoulder, relieved of the bow for the first time in months, still protests specific movements. Reaching to the roof beam is not possible without sharp complaint from the joint. Lifting heavy objects to shoulder height produces a wrenching discomfort that forces a change in technique. By midwinter, you have largely stopped noticing it except when cold settles the joint into its worst configuration. By spring, it is part of the ordinary condition of the body, as unremarkable as the old blisters that hardened to callus or the knee that has favored since an awkward fall on the return march. The practice sessions resume in spring. The Sunday after Easter, the familiar gathering at the village butts. The bow is strung. The first draw reveals the shoulder immediately, saying the structural protest at full extension, announcing itself with clarifying precision against the quiet of a spring morning. You complete the draw, The arrow goes, you draw again. The younger men in the line are in the stage you occupied 10 years ago, developing the draw, building the muscle and bone adaptation that training requires. You observe them with the specific knowledge of someone who has carried the process to its further conclusions. The shoulder injury does not make them less. It makes them visible in a particular way, as bodies in the early stages of a transformation that will not stop at the point where it looks manageable. The village constable stands at the edge of the field, as he has every spring since you can remember. He watches, makes notes, observes who is present and who represents a capable bowman for the next time the crown needs to know where capable bowmen can be found. You are still on that list. The campaign did not remove you from it. The shoulder injury did not remove you from it. Survival itself did not remove you from it. Surviving and returning with demonstrated campaign experience may in fact have positioned you higher than before departure. The Crown trains archers through mandated practice. It deploys them through recruitment. Archers who survive return with skills deepened by combat. The Crown notes the survivors. Future deployments draw first on those with prior service. You draw and release. The shoulder registers the draw and provides its assessment of the situation. You continue regardless. The second campaign summons arrives in the autumn of the following year. The same official, the same documents. The transition from village routine to muster line takes less surprise energy because you know the shape of what follows. Familiarity with the process does not make it easier, but it eliminates the particular exhaustion of encountering each phase for the first time. This campaign follows the general pattern of the previous one. March, camp, engage, advance, engage again, manage injury, and supply across weeks in foreign terrain. The shoulder is now part of the calculation from the first day. You have adjusted the draw technique to compensate. A slightly shortened extension that reduces peak stress while retaining sufficient cast. Now, the technique works well enough to sustain function and reduces daily discomfort during high-volume shooting. What it doesn't do is prevent the accumulation of new stress in the adjacent structures now bearing the load shifted from the primary injury site. By the midpoint of the campaign, the area along the back edge of the shoulder blade has developed its own complaint, a deep ache that occupies the space between shoulder and spine and intensifies when the temperature drops. You have now acquired two chronic sources of discomfort where you previously had one. The body is building a catalog. A man from a village 3 miles east, one who draws a heavier bow than most in the company, does not complete the second campaign. During a disordered retreat from an engagement that went badly in its third phase, so he takes a sword cut across the drawing forearm that opens from wrist to mid-forearm. The wound is bound quickly enough to prevent immediate fatal blood loss. Infection develops within 4 days. By the end of the week, it has reached the muscle tissue. The barber surgeon makes the decision that saves the man's life while ending his archery career permanently. The arm below the elbow is removed. The surgery is performed with a heated blade, the wound cauterized, the stump bound. He survives. He returns to his village with one arm. Agricultural labor with one arm is not impossible but substantially restricted. Most physically demanding tasks that generate income require 2 hands. He will not draw a bow again. He will not be summoned for further campaigns. So he will spend the remainder of his life working out the practical adaptations required to maintain a household. The social support is real but irregular. A neighbor who helps with tasks requiring 2 people. A wife who adjusts her own work to cover what he can no longer do. A community that regards his injury as the cost of service rather than as a claim on formal support, because formal support for disabled veterans does not exist in any organized way. The pattern that has been building since childhood clarifies itself fully sometime during the 3rd campaign, which comes 2 years after the 2nd. You're in your late 20s, which means you have been drawing a bow for 15 years at minimum, across weekly practice sessions and 2 full campaigns and the additional shooting between them. And the body has accommodated this across every adaptation available. building bone density in the drawing arm, thickening tendon structures at both shoulders, developing a spinal curvature so slight that only careful examination would reveal it as different from normal. The body has done everything asked of it, but the cumulative account has been kept somewhere in the tissue, in the bone, in the specific angles of joints formed under repeated strain rather than ordinary loads, and the account is not reducible to zero. It is permanent and forward-facing. During the third campaign's heaviest engagement, you draw approximately 400 arrows across 2.5 hours of active shooting. At 400 draws in 2.5 hours, the shoulder structures work beyond any steady-state capacity they possess, when the muscles stabilizing the joint operate in deep fatigue from the 300th draw onward. The joint stabilizes itself increasingly through passive structures, capsule, ligament, tendon. These were not designed to bear the load of full bow draw repetitively. They bear it because they have no choice. At some point, between the 350th and 400th draw, something in the shoulder shifts in a way that does not shift back. Not a dramatic moment. No snapping sound, no sudden failure of function. The arm draws and releases, and draws again. But the quality of pain during the draw has changed character, moving from the burning of fatigue into something harder and more structural. A grinding quality at the joint that has not been present before. You continue drawing because the battle requires it and there is no alternative. When the engagement ends, you lower the bow and stand still for a moment, feeling the shoulder settle into whatever configuration it now rests in and naturally. The grinding has stopped, but it is quieter than its version of quiet before the engagement, in the same way a damaged object becomes quieter after the damage. Not healed, but no longer being stressed into the place where the damage expresses itself. The return from the third campaign is the return of a man who moves differently from the man who left. Not dramatically differently. Nothing is visibly broken. You walk at normal pace. You carry equipment the standard distance. The discharge at the muster point proceeds normally. The walk home is 2 days. But the shoulder that accompanied you on all 3 campaigns and the 15 years of practice before them no longer moves through its full range without a specific and non-ignorable conversation. The overhead reach possible when you arrived for the first muster is no longer possible on the left side without the joint producing a sensation that interrupts whatever else you are doing. The draw, when you test it shortly after returning home, is achievable but costs more per draw than it did before the last campaign, and the cost is not of the kind that reduces with warm-up. It is structural cost, paid at the joint regardless of temperature or preparation. The bow hangs in its usual place in the house. Your son, who is 9 years old, has been watching men practice at the village butts on Sundays since he was old enough to walk there. But he has asked, in the way 9-year-old boys ask things, when he will be allowed to try. You take him to the practice field the Sunday after your return. You hand him the lighter bow kept for younger learners and show him the stance. Feet at shoulder width, body angled to the target, the bow arm extended, the draw arm coming back. He draws it. The string comes back approximately 1/3 of the necessary distance. He releases, and the arrow falls well short of the target. He reaches for another arrow without being told. You watch him draw again. The motion is wrong in 6 ways that will be corrected over months and years of repetition. The stance, the anchor, the draw pulling with the arm instead of the back. None of these errors matter yet. What matters is that the body has encountered the bow for the first time and begun the process of learning its requirements. He is 9. He has strong hands from farm work. By the time he is 12, the lighter bow will be too easy. By the time he is 15, he will be drawing something close to war weight. By the time he is 20, his body will look like yours looks now, the left shoulder slightly higher, the muscle across the upper back on the drawing side with that particular density. He does not know any of this yet. You watch him draw a 3rd time and say nothing about what he is beginning. The summer when you cannot take the draw tells you what you already knew. The bow comes up, the arm extends, the draw begins, and the shoulder moves through the first portion of the arc correctly. At approximately 2/3 of full draw, the joint produces the grinding sensation from the last campaign, now present at a lower threshold of effort than it was then. You push through to full draw. The arrow goes, the shoulder grinds throughout and does not reduce when you return to rest. You draw twice more. The third draw, held for the 3 seconds a precise shot requires, communicates something the previous draws did not. Not the steady complaint of overuse, but the specific protest of a structure being used past the point it can reliably bear. You release. You lower the bow. The next Sunday at the practice field you attend, but do not draw. You stand at the edge and observe. The constable notes your presence without drawing. He makes no comment. As in a few weeks, the question of whether this is temporary illness or something permanent will answer itself through continued absence from the shooting line. You watch men draw. You watch your son, who has progressed to a heavier bow and whose draw is developing the back engagement that proper technique requires. His shoulder is building toward what yours built toward. The process is entirely visible to you and entirely invisible to him. The muster summons the following year does not include you. Whether this reflects information about your shoulder that has filtered through the county's informal tracking, or simply the mathematics of a recruitment pool that does not need every man on every list, you do not know. Your son is included. He is 17. The draw weight he now pulls comfortably was what you were drawing at his age. Well, he musters. He crosses to France with a column you know the shape of but do not accompany. You watch him leave from the lane in front of the house, in the way that men who have done what he is going to do watch those who are about to do it. Without the comfort of ignorance, without the ability to offer a reassurance that is actually true. The village continues in his absence with the adjustment all villages make when men leave for campaign. Women managing tasks that were shared, neighbors covering labor that would have been his, the community redistributing work across the reduced workforce. The practice at the village butts continues on Sundays. Younger men who were boys when you began your training attend now, moving through the early stages of the same development. The constable attends. The skill is observed and noted and registered in the informal system the Crown maintains to ensure the next recruitment has access to the same quality of trained bowmen. Your shoulder does not improve. The range of motion narrows further as months pass, the joint settling into a configuration that prioritizes daily functional range over the extended positions drawing required. Overhead work is managed by using the right arm as primary and the left as secondary support, reversing a lifetime of opposite habit. The adaptation takes 2 seasons to fully ingrain. Agricultural labor continues. The body that cannot draw a bow can still dig and plant and harvest and carry within the reduced parameters the shoulder establishes. It is not the same body that left for the first campaign, but it is a body that works. Saigon working bodies are valued for their output regardless of the history that produced their current configuration. Your son returns from the first campaign with the campaign's standard returns. Pay in coin, a slight change in how he holds himself, a set to the jaw that was not there before he left, and a small cut above his left eye scarred into a pale line that will be visible for the rest of his life. He draws at the practice field the first Sunday after his return and draws well, the motion disciplined and clean. The men around him note the quality of the shooting. The constable notes it. You watch from outside the shooting line. He does not ask about your shoulder in direct terms, because direct terms are not the language available between you on subjects of this kind. He watches you from the corner of his vision when he thinks you are not looking, the way you watched older men when you were learning, reading information in the body's posture and movement that words would not transmit. He knows what he is looking at. He is looking at the forward edge of his own future, rendered in the specific form it takes when a man has drawn a war bow for 20 years under the conditions the Crown establishes and maintains. He draws again. The arrow goes true to the target center. The village butts stand at the edge of the common field where they have always stood. The earthen mounds were built by men who are dead, maintained by men who inherited the obligation. And will be maintained by whoever comes after the current generation, as long as the crown requires trained archers, and this village remains among the places that produce them. The practice sessions rotate through the same pattern. Spring arrivals of young men beginning the process. Summer sessions when the light lasts long. Autumn practice as campaigns return their participants and the next generation observes the men who survived. Winter sessions that continue despite cold, because the law's expectation does not observe weather exceptions. You attend when the shoulder permits, which is most Sundays. You do not draw. You observe. Occasionally, a younger man asks a question about technique or campaign practice that your experience can answer, and you answer it without ceremony. In the brief, factual terms that experience teaches are more useful than elaboration. The answers you give are accurate. They are also incomplete, because the parts of the experience most useful to transmit are not accessible through question and answer. The gradual accumulation of physical cost, the specific quality of the shoulder on the 400th draw, the moment in a French barn when you assessed the morning's range of motion and understood the trajectory without wanting to understand it. These are not transmitted through instruction. They are produced by the practice and the deployment and the years of continued operation within a system that does not adjust its requirements to match the individual body's accumulated condition. The younger men at the practice field will carry their own versions of this knowledge to the point where it becomes personally experiential. The practice will produce them as it produced you. The campaigns will deploy them as it deployed you. The body will absorb the cost as your body absorbed it. Your son is in his second campaign now. His draw weight has increased since the first campaign, the muscle and bone adapting upward through the consistent demand of practice between deployments. He carries the war bow you have not been able to draw for 3 years. Whether he will carry it for 15 years before the shoulder changes the terms of the question, or 20 years or longer, depends on variables that the practice field and the campaigns and his own body will determine through their interaction across the years ahead. The village butts stand in the afternoon light of a late spring Sunday, marked by the impacts of the current session and every session that preceded it, layered into the earthen face in a record no one reads, because no one needs to read it. The practice continues,